Good morning, Kate here, bringing you this week's Monday mission. In this one, I wanted to talk all about shame and blame. So, as humans, when something happens that we think is negative or we think that something has gone wrong, we can do a few different things. And one of those things that we can do is get stuck in this loop or this cycle of blame and shame. Okay, so something happens, something goes wrong, we blame someone else for it, or we shame or we blame ourselves. We shame ourselves, we feel ashamed for it. So sometimes we can get into this cycle, into this loop, and it's really difficult to break this cycle. And especially if it's a habit that you've developed over years, if it's sort of a way that you have coped with negative things or things that have happened in your life, it is going to be something that's difficult to break because it's that ingrained pattern. Remember, I always talk about in our brains those sledding hills that we make, that when something has happened over and over and over again, it's even stronger to change when that happens. So I'll talk a little bit about what blame and shame are, what this cycle is, and then what we can do to break this cycle. Okay, so when talking about shame, Brene Brown is probably the most renowned researcher on shame. So if you haven't heard of Brene Brown or you haven't read anything from her, I highly recommend. She did The Gifts of Imperfection. She has many books out there. She has a podcast, but she has done a lot of research on shame. And what she has found is that in order for shame to continue and to stay thriving, are a few things. One of which is secrecy, so keeping it secret. Silence, so not recognizing it, not bringing it to the light, not even acknowledging that it exists. And judgment. So, because this thing happened, you're worthless, no one will love you, you bring nothing to the world, you don't deserve any of this, you're not a good person. Judgment can kind of keep that shame going. And what her research also found is that the people that are most resilient to shame, okay, so everybody experiences it. That's something that I think is helpful to remember too, is that everyone experiences shame. But the people that were found to be most resilient to it are people that know what triggers shame for them. So people that have done the work, have thought about their thoughts, and have figured out what things trigger them into that feeling of shame. What thoughts make them feel ashamed or shame themselves for it. So they know what their triggers are. They are able to get a reality check, meaning they're able to check themselves. They're able to challenge those thoughts that are bringing up those feelings of shame for them. And they share the experience, they share the feelings, they share the thoughts with someone else that they trust. They speak their shame. So remember, one of the things that keeps shame alive and thriving is silence. So if we're brave enough to share what's going on, then that will be a powerful way to be resilient against shame and to not allow that shame to set up home and stay there. Okay, so let me give you an example of sort of this shame blame cycle that may come up. Okay, so again, let's say that something happened. All right, so remember, in all of these things that we're talking about, something happens in the world, an event, a circumstance, something happens, and we have thoughts about those events or those things. Our thoughts then create our feelings. Okay, those feelings create behaviors, those behaviors get us results. And I want to focus here at this point. So let's say that something went wrong. We think that something negative happened, something went wrong, it's going horribly. And our thoughts about that and our feelings about that, when we have, that thought of what went wrong, our brain is automatically going to look for reasons and answers to that question. And when we get stuck in this loop, in this cycle, it's because the one way that we go is that we blame it on the other person. So we point fingers at someone else. You caused this problem for me. This is because of you. You did this. We blame, right? But then our brain goes, well, maybe it's our fault. Maybe we did something. Maybe it's something wrong with us. And we go over to this shame feeling. Okay? And then we think, no, wait, no, it's absolutely that they're wrong. It's their fault. They always do this. This always happens. And we go back to the blame, and we just keep going back and back and back. There, I erased my shame. But we go back and back and back and forth through this cycle, and it's really, really, really difficult to break that. So let's give an example. All right, so let's say that the event is your sister calls you selfish. She tells you that you're selfish, you've always been selfish, and that's why this thing is going wrong, right? You're selfish. And what you immediately might say is, well, she shouldn't say that. I'm now having negative feelings about myself, and it's because of her. It's because of her saying this horrible thing to me, and she shouldn't have said that, and I'm not selfish, and how dare she? And then we start to back it up, right? We start to get evidence. So we tell our mom, and we tell our other sister, and we tell our friends, and we tell people at work, can you believe she did this? And can you believe that she said that? We try to build our case for why it's her fault. But then we go over here and we think, maybe I am selfish. What's wrong with me? I'm a bad person. I was totally selfish at this time, and she's right. And that's when the shame starts to set in. But you think, no, I don't want to stay there. I don't want to feel this horrible feeling, so I'm going to blame her. And you go back, and that cycle continues, right? So the way to break that cycle, and what Brene Brown says the antidote for shame is being spoken out loud and empathy, having empathy for yourself, right? And some ways that you could answer this question of what went wrong is to say, nothing. Yeah, my sister called me selfish. Okay, it is what it is. It can mean several different things. It can mean that, yeah, sometimes I am selfish. Sometimes I maybe do things that seem selfish, or say something that can come across that way, and think about ways that you could change that. Or you could think, sometimes she really just blurts out her feelings that she's having, and they aren't necessarily true, so I need to take it with a grain of salt. But I love my sister loves me. We're both humans, and we both mess up, and it's okay. This does not have to have a side. This does not have to mean all of these emotional things that we're attaching to it. So the answer to this question is nothing. Just because we have an emotion does not mean that something is wrong. If we have a negative emotion, it does not mean that something is wrong. It's just data. Our emotions are data. They're data that are telling us to be curious about what thoughts are causing that feelings for us. And if you that feeling for us. So if you realize that you're in this shame blame cycle, the way to break it is to just stop. Be curious, right? Okay? Break the cycle, be curious, figure out what the data is trying to tell you, and then come up with different meanings, different thoughts to have about the situation, about the event. Okay, so that's sort of the cycle of shame and blame that can come up for you. And your mission, should you choose to accept it, is the next time you find that self in that cycle, whether you're blaming or you're shaming, because shaming really is blaming ourselves, right? I want you to just stop and be curious and think of that feeling that's coming up for you, that feeling of shame and that feeling of wanting to blame someone else, as data, and just think, what is this trying to tell me? What's another way that I can look at this situation? This event, this thing that has gone so horribly wrong, is not the end of the world. It just is what it is. Embrace the isness of it. It's actually neutral. Your sister calling you selfish is neutral. There's no meaning to it until you attach meaning to it with your thoughts. And think about what thoughts you want to have around the situation. Understand where blame and shame come from, and that remember that antidote to it is to be empathetic and to speak it and to share it, and so that it's not sitting there in silence and just ruminating, and then the next time you're presented with a similar event or a similar thing that happens, it all comes back up for you because it was never really dealt with. All right, so that's your mission. As always, share with me what comes up for you, what your thoughts were on this. I love hearing from you, and anything that this, anything that relates to you or that really resonates with you from these. So talk to you soon. Have a great day. Thanks.